WBNE.
Hello, and welcome to episode 174, all about Rings of Power Season 1, being the 174th part of That's What I'm Tolkien About. Hello, my name is Mary Clay. If that's too complicated for you, just call me MC. I've been experiencing the world of J.R.R. Tolkien for the first time, but right now we are all experiencing Rings of Power for the first time together. Today, I'm joined by Ezra of an unexpected podcast, Talkin' Tolkien. Welcome!
Hey, thank you. Happy to be here. This is awesome. This is my second time. Yeah,
I should say welcome back, because I had y'all on, I think it was back when I was reading, definitely was reading the books, and I think it might have been Return of the King. So it's been a minute.
It's been a while. And I was saying to you beforehand, so we're not joined by Lane today. He's got a lot of different things going on in his life personally. So he wanted to say hello to you, and just wanted to I have some things I'll be sharing on his behalf as well, just in terms of thoughts on the show, because we had a great ride. It's been a crazy season, I think, and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts and just how it's been over here in terms of the show and your guests and everything. So
yeah, before we jump into our discussion, why don't you tell me and the listeners where you're coming into this series from, like your background, quote unquote. Not that you have to have qualifications to watch this show, but for a lot of people, it's helpful to know, like, oh, do you know the Silmarillion? Do you know these things? Yeah. Have you read Lord of the Rings? Have you read the appendices, those sort of things? Or are you just a movie watcher? So
right.
Where are you coming from?
Yeah, gosh, as soon as you asked that question, I wanted to pull up my resume and go crazy about my, Tolkien sort of like, I'm a scholar, worked on the show, the whole thing. No, I started reading The Hobbit when I was in sixth grade, loved it, read the books, and the movies came out, and have just sort of dabbled here and there. I have read the Silmarillion once through, but it is truly more so like I listened to it and wasn't really paying attention as much. Mm-hmm. It was just going on in the background. And I thought, okay, this is nice. And some bits kind of caught my attention. And honestly, I've been listening more recently since I've been watching Rings of Power, going back through. I've been falling asleep to it at night because I have the audiobook, and it's just great to fall asleep to. But things are popping out. Feanor, the Silmarils, all the kind of stuff is starting to kind of jump out, and different names are catching me more. So really, I come at it from I've read the trilogy. I've read I've dabbled just on Tolkien Gateway and things like that, but I've never really dove in and done like a full Silmarillion read through or anything. And I know you I think did you finish yours?
Yeah, I'm just about done. I finished all of the chapters.
Okay.
And then there are two sections at the end. One is called Akalabeth, and one is, ironically, of the Third Age and the Rings of Power. So I will be reading that, having, just finished season 1 of Rings of Power. I actually think is going to be a more interesting read, because I think watching the show, I didn't want to be like making predictions based on, like, I wanted to have more of a blind, going in with more of a blank slate than having just read whatever this is based on. But then again, they don't have rights to the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
So
that's been,
anyway,
it's been a mystery. It's so you've been saying, and I always mispronounce it. This is where I would get laughed at by my co-host. So the Akalabeth, is that the, that's
how I'm saying it.
Yeah. I've said it. I'll say it probably 5 different ways as we go through here. But that's at the end of the Silmarillion, right? That's sort of like tucked in at the end. And then, so that part we did listen to quite a bit going into the show. And my buddy Lane and I just sort of did a little bit of research and throw it out the window, because it didn't really, some bits sort of matter. It's this list, it's fascinating to me what they did, what I thought they were going to do, not what I thought they, what we're going to do. It's just been crazy. And then to hear the fandom go to be pulled in so many different directions it's been kind of a crazy thing. But I have read that portion. I've read a bit of the Silmarillion. Lane and I are going to be firing up our kind of first formal read through going forward. After, I think in the next month or two, we're going to fire it up. And so that'll be
Godspeed.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. We put it off because I'm like, I don't know if I could take this serious. I've tried to read it, and I don't think, I feel like a lot of people struggle with it and they don't know
Mm.
what to do. I've even listened to Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor, and others tried to use their podcast and walk through the Silmarillion and listen to them talk about how they'd adapt it and stuff. And I'm just sort of like, it helps for sure, but it's just thick. It's just a lot of names.
Yeah,
and
it's very dense. It's a lot of names. A lot of the names are the exact same.
yes.
Very confusingly, there are a couple names in the Silmarillion that are also the same name as different things or different people from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure there's a Boromir and there's a Denethor, but they're
What?
not our Boromir and they're not our Denethor.
Oh.
So it's very confusing. I don't think the Silmarillion is like a necessary read for Lord of the Rings fans unless you are just like absolutely desperate for more. If you are really itching for more, then go for it. But otherwise, it's like, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. But it was interesting reading it before watching the show because it did kind of lay some of the foundation, show some of the background of these characters and like the way that the way that the world they were living in was just before the start of this series.
Right.
And showing that like they were coming from this terrible, destructive war and then going into what, King Gil-galad in the first episode says is now a time of peace. And they're desperate for that. So it was helpful context, but I think in terms of the show, that's all it was just like additional context.
Well, and just to kind of piggyback on that, we going into the show, Lane and I both on our podcast were like, "All right, we're not gonna dive into it. We didn't have time for it." And I thought we don't need it. No worries. Nothing's gonna come up or whatever. And I mean, a few names like Finrod comes up out, and I'm sort of like, hold on a second. You forget about some of these names that they bring up, and I'm like, was that in the like, where's he referenced? And I don't know. I felt like I should have read more and done a bit more research because then theories were coming up. Adar shows up and you're like, who is this guy? Who could he be? And then you're scrolling through Twitter and there's, about, 2 to 3 different names floating around as in terms of who he could have been from the First Age or whatever. And turns out he's just Lord Father. So
Yeah. Let's go into our discussion of season 1. Listeners, this will be a fully spoilery episode. So if you have not watched season 1, if you haven't started it, if you haven't finished it yet, come back later. So I've been doing for each episode, I've been sharing the Rotten Tomatoes critic score just for each episode, just to see like what a more objective, even though like there is no true objective critique of anything, it is still helpful to see like what are people who are not as like attached to this world saying. So season 1 overall is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think that's a great accomplishment for the show considering they have a audience score of 39%.
Right.
With 34,692 user ratings. And to compare to show that it really was getting review bombed, House of Dragon has 7,795 user ratings.
Wow.
So clearly people were flocking just to yuck on this show before having any, real opinion of it. But critics rating of 85%, I think is what is more, what you should more go off of if people are like, oh, how did it do, percentage wise or critics wise or whatever.
Right.
So a standard, like B-.
Yeah. So that's interesting because I've seen the way like the Reddit communities can move and mobilize people and just different things like I'm not on there a lot, but like some of those Reddit forums can be kind of crazy. And I read about this. I was reading articles about the review bombing and how that was happening or whatever. And I mean, it was just overwhelmingly negative and it was in the thousands of reviews early on in the season when the first batch, the first couple episodes came out. And you're like, wow, this thing hasn't even. And I thought were some of the strongest episodes. Now looking back on the whole season, I thought the beginning was super strong, in my opinion. But so that's shocking. I guess it's interesting to compare those numbers to House of the Dragon. because there's just as many people watching that,
Yeah,
and the fan base
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And considering it's like the natural comparison because it's also streaming right now.
Yeah.
At the same time. Yeah, just so crazy. 7,000 audience ratings versus 34,000. That really just puts it into perspective. Yeah, I'm scrolling through. If you don't want to die inside, don't read these ratings, but just like scrolling through them, someone says, canceled my Prime subscription over this. Honestly, offensive to the source material and to intelligence in general.
Oh, that's so wild. It's so wild because the Tolkien estate, was actually working with them on this, and they had Tolkien scholars and different things. I mean, yeah, they made some irreversible decisions in terms of the timeline and stuff like that. But some of those reviews, I just remember this was, again, 7 weeks ago when we were looking at that. Amazon, I think, had stopped did they not stop the reviews?
They turned off. I hadn't been looking at any of their ratings or anything because I think they had like turned it off or something.
Yeah, I mean, they were seeing the same thing, which was they had already, Rotten Tomato was open for reviews, and it was already listed, and so it was getting review bombed, and I felt like they just said they foresaw it and said we're not gonna put up with it, really. So.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, like, I understand, you want to remain open to conversations and critiques, but that's the thing, is that a lot of these things were not conversations, and they were not critiques. They were just, plain, outright hateful. So
right. Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into our discussion then. So generally my thoughts on the season, I enjoyed it. I think I've seen some people say, shout out to Tea with Tolkien. I saw her tweeting that she had just done a rewatch of the whole season and really enjoyed it a lot better with all of the episodes out rather than week to week. And I think I can really understand how that would be the case, how it might be a better binge watch. And I do have friends who have not been watching because they wanted to wait for everything to be out first before they watched it. Yeah. But generally, I enjoyed it. I would also, give it a B-, basically. I think I'm just a little bit soured by the finale because I was let down by directions that I thought the story was going to go and directions that I thought characters were going to go.
Okay.
And then that did not happen. And so I was disappointed. When you imagine something in your head and you're like, I know how this is going to play out. It's going to be so cool. It's going to be awesome. And then that doesn't happen. That's obviously very disappointing. So even though I was disappointed in the finale, I think there were still a lot of really great storytelling points. I do think that they bit off more than they could chew in terms of the characters and the stories that they were showing in this season, and that they were maybe a bit too eager to show these characters and show these parts of the world, and they really wanted to do all that in season 1.
Right.
To get people interested and to get people watching, and that maybe they could have held off on some things until season 2 so that we can spend more time with that. But overall, I still think that, like, everyone's saying this is the worst TV show I've ever seen, like, terrible, but there's far worse television out there. And it was also just beautiful to watch. It was really stunning to watch. So I still did enjoy it. So how about you?
Yeah. I if it's okay, I'm going to take just a minute just to talk about the journey we've had on Up Talking Tolkien. And my co-host Lane, I told him I was going to tell on him here a little bit, but we started off just absolute believers of the gospel of Payne and McKay. We said, all right, give it to us. Let's go. I mean, here we go. We were so fired up and so locked in. And I mean, honestly, we were coming out strong saying, like, look, if you like this show, we were saying, don't be afraid to say you like the show. I mean, absolutely. Just telling everyone, go for that. Because sometimes the voices, not all the times, but like, I don't know, if you dislike it, but there's a lot of people out there who are very loud and very, very much against it. Like you said, they're absolutely hating it. The reviews. It's not even a critique, right? They're just review bombing and hating on it and whatnot. So we started off that kind of positivity. And then Lane went and watched a YouTube video that I've not watched yet that has a lore. Gosh, it's some lore master, we'll call him that. And he outlined sort of how this season should have
Or
gone.
did you say Matt?
No. So,
was the name of okay. There is an actual YouTube lore master named Matt.
Oh, really?
He is Nerd of the Rings, I believe.
Oh, yeah. No.
So I was like, oh, if his name is Matt, I'm pretty sure that's Nerd of the Rings.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, go on.
And his videos are awesome, by the way. Anybody was like, you learn so much from his stuff. It's just absolutely phenomenal. I forget who this was. I think it's like Tolkien Untangled or something, maybe. I don't.
Oh,
is that? I don't know.
I had been when I was looking for guests for this quote unquote season of the podcast. And was looking on YouTube and was clicking around, and there were a couple that were just. I don't want to say too much if I am misremembering that channel, but I remember not having great vibes and thinking I'm not sure I would enjoy having them on.
Yeah, there are some out there for sure, because that was actually the thing that Lane went looking for, which was like, okay, look, we're super high on this and we're super, locked in. What's the other side of the coin? What are people saying
exactly.
or whatever? So he went out searching for that. And I think this guy, and he only watched one video, right? And he tried to lay, it was really the time. What do they call it? The time compression, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest, I think, because once you do that, you really can't go back from that. You've kind of committed to that, and you've said, I mean, I guess maybe they could flash back and do different things or whatever, but they decided to kind of condense the timeline and put characters, with characters who weren't alive at certain times, like especially the Numenorians and just, I don't know, like the way they kind of, I don't actually know all that stuff either. I haven't given it that much thought or gone and looked to see.
I mean, I don't really either. That's the thing.
Yeah,
like people are like, oh, you just read the Silmarillion and you read, and I'm like, I really like when people are saying, oh, well, it's ruining the canon and it's, it has nothing to do with the lore anymore. I'm like, what lore?
What lore? That's my big thing. So I saw someone the other day say, like, why are people complaining so much about like maybe 3 to 5 pages worth of like actual lore that was and according to them, that like the rights that they had were not, I think, as much as, I don't know, it's all a little confusing for me still. I've wanted somebody to really break down what rights they have, because there's like special agreements that they have with the Tolkien estate to mention certain names and stuff, and you're like, okay, well, it just seems all kind of bizarre. But anyway, I overall have been very happy with the show. And I've enjoyed it. I've been very positive on it. And I've actually, even as Lane sort of leaned into that, like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like they've got something, they're not characterizing Gil-galad maybe the right way or different things. And I don't want to speak for him, because he's probably gonna be like, daggone it, Ez, you're making me sound like but we kind of leaned different ways. We started to kind of go, all right, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, because clearly episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4, like Lane was, or 1 through 3, was pretty locked in. And then you can hear a major shift on our podcast as he's like scratching.
Oh, that's really great.
He scratches his head going, I don't know, man. I've been, checking out other stuff and it doesn't sound good. So it was just kind of interesting. But overall, I really did enjoy it. I thought they were really good moments. There are some things that it needs to work on and maybe improve upon, or that didn't make sense or got tiresome. But overall, I really did enjoy it and had a good ride. I mean, I looked forward to it I'd watch it Friday after school. I would come home, watch it, and then we would do a quick reaction podcast to it on Friday. So I had a great time. I mean, until Lane started, like, it was, because then we'd be talking about it and I would be talking about, like, man, this is so cool that, the stranger did this. And then there was this little thing or whatever. And he'd be like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's always so funny when like you're watching something and you're like, oh, I know exactly how everyone is going to feel about this, and they're going to feel like I feel. Yeah. And then you talk to someone else and you're like, how did we watch the same thing? Like, how are you getting these feelings and thoughts? That's not at all what I was feeling and thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So a real awkward one. And to Lane's credit, like, he very much wanted both sides to be heard on the show. And if you liked it, cool. If you didn't, awesome, fine. I mean, come on and share those things. And that's hard. I think when you hear two guys who are like really positive on the show at first, and then you want to call in and say, like, I don't know what you guys are talking about. Like, I don't really like this or whatever. We had our live call-in show, and it was great to hear people kind of come in there and be very respectful about what they didn't like or what they weren't seeing or just what they weren't connecting with. And I thought that was good. That's not the people who are out review bombing and hating because of diversity and stuff like that. Like some of that stuff was absolutely ridiculous before we started even the season off. But yeah, so we had a very an interesting, dialogue there on the podcast, and it was good. But Lane overall had a really good, experience as well too, just with friends and talking through it and everything. And it's still very hopeful for season 2. So I don't want to, misrepresent him there at all, because we had a great time and it was a lot of fun. And we actually kind of, just humor it. We make a lot of jokes on the podcast. I always want people to know that we are jokesters. So
yeah, listeners, definitely go check all that out if you want to hear additional perspectives about the show. Yeah, definitely for me, a highlight of the season was just experiencing it with other people, especially because from my perspective, I was coming into everything like 20 years too late, and I, didn't have people to live tweet about, and have live reactions and everything. And now I'm like interacting in real time with the rest of the fandom, and that part has been really great, and like connecting more with people and like making stupid TikToks and memes and stuff and just enjoying it all together.
Yeah, for sure. That's the, like even doing this with you, this has been, my wife, she went on a podcast, she went on Lord of the Rings, with the watch party, Lord of the Rings, and Fellowship of Fans. Maybe you they have a pretty good Twitter following. But like all of that, and we're mentioning multiple podcasts, different projects. I've seen you had guests on, every week. Like that is sort of what makes it, and that's like the fellowship, and it feels really cool to share those experiences and talk about it.
I know, isn't it great? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some strong points of the season. I've said on multiple episodes, I think the dwarves for me were a huge highlight. I think they really nailed the characterization. I know a lot of people were very critical of Peter Jackson's characterization of Gimli because he's very much like the butt of the joke and the comedic relief. And there's a lot more to dwarves than that. And we do still get a lot of that from Prince Durin in this season. Like the best moment was when he played Gilgalad about that table and was like, it's dear to us. It's the most sacred stone ever. And then he makes them carry it back to Khazad, which someone did the math, and it's like 600 miles.
Oh my!
Just so that Disa could have a table. Like that's a great moment. But we see so much more. We see Khazad in its prime before the downfall that we see in Fellowship of the Ring, and the destruction, and we see and that's also why I was disappointed with the finale, is because in in episode 7 we had some really great dynamics going on with King Durin and Prince Durin and Disa. People were getting mad at me, but I was saying I'm really scared about Disa because she started having some like power hungry thoughts at the very end of episode 7 that I was worried about. And so that's why I was like, oh, I can't wait to see where this goes and how they're going to end this for the season. And then they weren't in the finale at all. So, but yeah, I think the dwarves were a highlight.
Yeah, no, 100%. The first thing I wrote down was Durin and Elrond, family bonds and friendship. And I was just like, that's where it was at. When you mentioned the table, I got chills thinking about it because the music sets in there. And one of the strong points is the music, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure. But the music sets in and he gets so serious and just like, you're like, oh, like Gilgalad, like, messed up, you think he like messed up and you're like, he's getting schooled and it's a freaking joke. That was honestly one of the best moments for sure.
And again, shout out to the Prince Durin actor Owain Arthur. He is just like really shining throughout this season as Durin, just nailing it.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned Disa and how you were kind of feeling, well, like maybe she's getting power hungry or whatever you want to call it.
Don't get me wrong, I still love her. I still love her.
She can be as power hungry as she wants. I want her to like rule the world. Because we had a caller call in and say that she reminds us of Lady Macbeth a little bit. And I was saying that too. I was like, whoa, that's kind of wild. Like to think about it. Just, I don't know. It does make a lot of sense. And I so it makes you think about season 2 and where that is going to go and how she's going to, push
Yeah.
Durin. It's going to be awesome. But yeah, you're right. They weren't in the finale, and that was everything's just you're just left hanging. Arondir, Bronwyn. I mean, it's just all kind of like
Yeah.
those storylines just drop. And I mean, again, the stranger and everyone else, like what we saw in the finale, wasn't necessarily prevalent in episode 7, right? So but it just that sucked to kind of have that. That shows you how much they had going on, really, which some people might think is a critique, I guess. But anyways, strong points. A couple more. My favorite character of the whole daggone thing, because I was rooting hard for this the whole time, and people hate me for this. That's fine. The stranger. I was 100% locked in, and I was like, when he starts talking and the veil is sort of lifted, and I could, oh my, it just was so great. The actor's name I'm blanking. Wayman?
Daniel Wayman.
Yeah, Wayman. Yeah.
By the way, I don't have any of these memorized. I have the cast list up.
Okay,
in front
good.
of me.
God bless you. Because I was like, yeah.
And also just like even more impressive because so much up until, like the last 30 minutes of the finale, his character is very nonverbal. So a lot of his acting had to come through with his expressions and his body language. And yeah, he did a really great job.
Well, I mean, when he's sitting there with Nori a few episodes back, and he's just they're going over words, migration, my great thumb.
Yes.
I was just like, I
love that.
Every little thing that he said, I was just sort of like, whoa. And so I don't know, it carried over because I thought maybe once he started, talking more and giving us more in-depth dialogue that we would lose some of that. No way. It just kept going up. It was a straight just rise all the way to the end. And so that was cool. I know some people kind of, we can talk about this in a second, like just a weak point or something, but people talk about the mystery fatigue and stuff. I loved, for me, I loved that, I guess, just in terms of the stranger. Maybe I kind of get it with Sauron. I mean, I'm just sort of, I'm biased, so I love wizards and I just think they're awesome. And I was hoping real hard that was going to be either Gandalf or one of the wizards or something. So, and everyone was like, they're not there, they're not around during that time. I was like, I don't care.
Yeah, a lot of this, that's my thing about that's right. Earlier when you were talking about how Lane went and watched that video and was talking about the timeline compressions, I had a thought and then I forgot it. I remembered it just now. Yeah. Anyway, I have been explaining the show, like some people in comment sections and stuff are like, I hear it's different. I hear it's going off of different timelines. Like, how can you watch this and still have this other piece of canon? And I say, I just think of these as just they're different timelines at this point. They're different. It's not that they changed the original timeline. It's just that we're in a new world, and this in the Rings of Power world, this is what the timeline is. And that's also how I'm able to really enjoy the Witcher media universe with the different the video games and the show and the books are all very different. But I enjoy the different adaptations because it's like watching an alternate universe with a lot of the same characters. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, and I run a Star Wars podcast. And when they decanonized all the old stuff and Disney took over, I was like, I have a massive head for a reason. Okay, so like I can kind of keep this timeline here. Give me new stuff. That's fine. I feel like you just have to do that. You have to set it up and take it for what it is. But yeah. For me, another a strong point is, and I don't think it's very surprising considering the source material, but I think they did a really great job with the world building. Yeah. A lot of people were not fans of the Harfoots. I think just because whenever they showed up on screen, it was kind of not derailing the plot, but it was a very different plot line than the rest of the stories. But I loved the Harfoots because the world building and showing the detail of their culture and their community and their way of life was so wonderful. In Numenor too, I loved getting to, I mean, this is also going to go into the visuals and the costuming and stuff, but I think they did a really great job. And just, I think the world building was a really, really well done. And it could have been very confusing considering we were jumping around from so many different places. But they did a pretty good like narrative structure of, you know, occasionally, especially I think it was mostly in the first couple episodes where they have like the map feature come up and show you where you are, or labeling like, okay, now we're in Oregon.
Yeah.
I think was helpful. But yeah, I think they did a really good job with creating the world that this show is set in.
Yeah. Now, Mary Clay, I got to ask you a question. I got to get some clarity here. Okay. So when you talk about building this world, I mean, can we not just lay all that on Waldreg's shoulders, right? Did he not actually just like build the world right in front of us? I mean, so that part, I know what you're saying though, which is in terms of like the culture and all that kind of stuff. Now I'm with you 100% on that. Like the Harfoots were amazing. I love seeing Sadek open the book and they're looking at the stars and doing everything. And you learn so much about Numenor and the way of life, even for the dwarves, so much more insight to their way of life and that world, which was awesome. I know some of the critiques out there, maybe one of mine. So even some like a weak point was the creation of Mordor for some people. They were sort of like, it was Waldreg and it was like, it was Adar and it wasn't necessarily Sauron. It didn't really hit me. I was sort of like, okay, whatever. But I mean, he walks into it and it's already created. And I think some people were hoping he had more to do with that. And it seemed like he and Adar weren't on the same page. And like Adar was his enemy.
I hadn't really thought about that in terms of Sauron's part in it, because I was going to say another strong point for me was episode 6, was that big battle that they have in the Southlands that ends with, Mount Doom exploding. That was for me. I think that could have even been like a season finale if had been like the story that they were going to tell in this season. But I hadn't really thought about like, oh yeah, Sauron doesn't really have anything to do with that creation. He was just kind of there. And I have been really wondering about his relationship with Adar, because in episode 6, he, as Halbrand, has that moment where he's about to kill him and is like, don't you know who I am? Like, you've taken everything from me or something.
Right.
And I don't know in that moment if he is just acting as Halbrand in front of Galadriel, or if he actually does have some, whatever this history is with Adar, and if it is a conflict between them. And that I think could lead to some interesting things in season 2 of him walking into Mordor and here's this guy who made Mordor happen when he wasn't involved. And just like really interesting, that whole setup.
Yeah, for sure. So two things. First of all, I did love the creation of it. So I thought it was a wild ride and like an epic sort of, just the visual. And I was blown away that they did that. I was shocked. So that was great. But I also, you brought up something as you were talking there, it made me think that when Adar is there and he's reaching out for the package or whatever, and his hand gets cut, right, and Halbrand is there later on, because then he's taken he's taken back to the camp. That's when Galadriel kind of questions him and talks to him. So he already saw Halbrand, and Halbrand said, remember me, as if like maybe he should in this form, or maybe he can see beyond that. And then later on he says to Galadriel that he killed Sauron, right? And then somebody lets Adar go. I mean, at the end, somebody unhandcuffs him and lets him go because he was tied up in that barn and is able to get away before the right? I think unless I'm misremembering, I'm just trying to think back on the sequence of events.
Yeah, I do remember that was a point that in that episode discussion we just like didn't get to discussing, is that Adar is missing like inexplicably. Like it cuts to the barn and like his chains are empty and he's gone. I kind of interpreted that as, I don't know, some random magic.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know, but it is possible that someone came and let him go. I do like him saying I killed Sauron. I think that could easily be directly tied to, Halbrand / Sauron's pure hatred of him earlier when he has the chance to kill him.
Okay.
I think those could definitely be connected, and that like the reason he is in Halbrand, the reason he looks like Halbrand and that he's taken on this body is because of whatever happened between Adar and Sauron previously.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, because it just seems so odd that he wouldn't, like that Adar has Galadriel right there and could have outed Halbrand right there. He could have said, that's Sauron.
Well, maybe he didn't know that it was.
Okay, yeah. And
that's what I'm thinking, is that he didn't know that was Sauron.
He didn't know. And so I'm thinking if you take the other approach here, because one of my gripes was sort of like, I don't know. I mean, Sauron wasn't around for the creation of, like, it would have been kind of cool if he somehow orchestrated this or something through Adar. And then maybe Adar doesn't out him. It's weird because he says, remember me. And I know what you're saying, which is like, yeah, it's a part of the creation aspect of it. Anyway, that's more story to tell in season 2. And I think there's a lot more kind of going on with those two characters, because he calls him at one point his enemy. I mean, he says, you helped me fight my enemy, which was right. So
that was confusing.
So I don't know. I mean, yeah, but anyway, so kind of a mix is whether it's strong, the whole weak strong point. It's just a something intriguing, I guess, moving forward. But
yeah, moving into some of my weak points. Yeah, again, I think generally, they bit off more than they can chew. I think as much as I enjoyed the Harfoots and as much as I enjoyed the Stranger, I don't think that they necessarily had a place in this season, because I think the only reason he was there was to act as a possible Sauron for the audience.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's the only reason that they included him, is to have that mystery. And I think that's another weak point, is that it felt more like the show is called Rings of Power.
Right.
And I feel like they really did not focus on the Rings of Power in this season.
Yeah.
And so going into the finale, I was like, there's no way that we're going to see the creation of any of the Rings of Power. Like, we're nowhere near ready. I haven't heard anything about the Forge being created since like episode 3. Is it even ready yet?
Yeah. Right.
And I felt like it was more of a who's Sauron show. And so I think that's why the Stranger was there, was to act as like is it like, could it be him? Could it not be him? In the episode that we did last week on the finale, one of my guests gave this great suggestion, which was you have season 1 end with the comet arriving. And then in the next season, then you can introduce the Harfoots, you can introduce the Stranger, and it's like a juxtaposition to the evilness of Sauron, and saying like, oh, well, maybe he was sent as a result of this evil that is happening in the land.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because you still could have even had like the Mystic. You could have just taken, I guess it's an interesting point. You could just take the Stranger out, have the Mystics wander, do something, or not even have them. And you could have, because I'm thinking of who else would you put in there to kind of make us guess about, if they wanted to keep doing the guessing game of Sauron, like who, if it's not the Stranger, that actually kind of just, the way you framed that, the way you said that, is like he's just there as another option for Sauron. I'm like, no, he's there for much more, but doggone it, that is sort of what it seems like, right?
Yeah, because I kept waiting. I was like, I want to see how because throughout the season, you see the dwarves and the elves, how their stories are connected. Okay, you see how Galadriel's story is connecting with the Númenóreans, who are then connecting with the Southlanders. And so it's all coming together, and, plot lines are intersecting and characters are meeting, except for the Harfoots and the Strangers. They only stay within their own little stories. So right. I was waiting to see how they are connected to the rest, and I don't think that's going to happen until much later. So I don't think we needed them this season. Right. And we could have had more time spent on like the Rings of Power.
Yeah, because in one of the things that I thought would be an interesting thing to kind of change would have been to show more of the Rings of Power, or to even whether you just move up this idea, because it just felt like it was, as you said, all crammed into this final episode. And Celebrimbor, I was waiting for him the joke on our podcast was that everyone kept thinking I was waiting for him to, you know, take his shirt off and show the biceps and start hammering on some rings.
Yeah.
Because I was hyping him up so crazy. I was like, get him in that forge, let's go. And it just never happened. The most he did was stand there and cross his arms and like, you know, kind of look over the production.
Yeah, he did do that a lot.
Of the ring. But I was like, man, I wanted more of that. And I wanted to see more of these rings of power. We were even speculating as to which ones might we see. How is this going to work with Durin and everything? And it just it didn't go that way. So I get that. You know, we would have had a lot more time to kind of tell that story. I don't dislike that the Harfoots were there. I still really enjoyed all of the.
Yeah, I enjoyed them. I just am not sure that they had a place in the story in this season.
Yeah, for sure. Because it just, you really felt like when you left one plot line, you were just, and they did move us across the map, and they were really trying to show off and show the different worlds, but you were totally disconnected from the other stories that were sort of interconnecting. So, because even Elrond and Durin, like that all kind of comes back full circle, Gil-galad and back to Halbrand, and they all do kind of interact and it connects. Whereas you're right, the Stranger, it doesn't. So
yeah,
and that sucks because I love the Stranger, and I was also just like, I didn't even know I wanted it because beforehand I was saying, don't do it. Like, there's no reason. Just give us all the elves and go crazy. Give me like Glorfindel or something. Go nuts. You know what I mean? Like, bring back some crazy characters. And we didn't necessarily need a wizard. Then they bring this guy in that looks like the Stranger, and I'm like, let's freaking go. Like, I'm down for this guy to be a wizard. Wish it were more interconnected, I guess, now that you say that. But still, one of my points here that was kind of a weak point, but I also am not super sure about this. I just want to acknowledge this though. The timeline contraction that people talk about, it doesn't bother me like as much. Like you said, it's really just this, it's its own thing. It's its own timeline. There are some things, I guess, just knowing, like they showed Elrond's brother, right? Like Elros. They showed like the
that tapestry thing. Yeah.
And I guess there were, and my buddy Lane was kind of telling me some ideas and things that could have been done to bring in characters like that. But the more I heard people talk about these things, I'm like, we already have a crap ton of characters. But then the other thing, people were like, well, you've got created characters, whereas you didn't need those created characters. They could have been these characters. And I was like, all right, I don't know. Don't be talking about the characters that I love right now, like Arondir. I love Arondir. Okay. So, I don't know. It was one of those things where I want to acknowledge that people say they have issues with the timeline, contraction or whatever, compression, but
I don't know if this is what you meant, but I'm pretty sure the reason we don't see Elrond's brother Elros is because he's dead at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sorry. Sorry. But yeah,
he would be very dead.
Yeah, but some people were proposing a structure in which like the first 3 episodes were way back then, and then like,
oh, okay, yeah.
And then you bounce 1,000 years, and they were gonna do these jumps of like, I don't even know. I mean, a couple like hundreds of years or whatever to show us the passing of kings and queens and to kind of get us up to a story that they would then iron out and tell. And I'm just like, wow, that I don't know how that would all work, and I don't know how people would do dialogue and how you would connect with a character that's gone in 3 episodes, a whole new. You have to have a through line. Which you could have with Galadriel and Elrond and whatnot for sure, but I
think the only way you could do that is if the episodes that happen hundreds of years in the past are centered on the elves, because then they are still there when we're in the in the future,
right?
Right. We haven't met and gotten attached to any characters, and then it's like, okay, well, now we're jumping 100 years ahead and they're not there anymore. So I think the only way that would have worked, like from an audience perspective and from like a perspective as like from connecting with the characters and their stories, is if it was about the elves,
right? Because if they go away, because you look at the Numenorians, and so if you start to connect to them early on in the season, well, by God, you gotta, I mean, you gotta keep showing us those same characters so we watch them develop and all that kind of stuff. So I thought I'm okay with it completely. I definitely have heard the gripes and how it goes super counter to the lore and whatnot. But I mean, they also showed us quite a bit. There is a big time jump, right? I mean, we see Galadriel talking to her brother. We see like they mentioned Morgoth, for crying out loud. Like I got chills when they were mentioning some of this stuff and just showing us what happened. And there was no name for death. They didn't know. they didn't have a name for it, and then death came to them. And I heard people
Yeah,
saying
that like prologue piece was really great. Yeah.
It was so good, and people were talking about how this doesn't feel Tolkien enough to them. I'm like, the opening line is about acknowledging death and how death came to their shores and how they then had to go fight and everything. And so I felt like, and there's tons of family bonds, friendship, and fellowship. And I felt like, I don't know what people are talking about. They definitely have still tons of like Tolkien themes, and it's
Oh yeah.
I mean,
One of them, like Tolkien's like connection and tie with nature, I think was really evident throughout this series. Especially like when you get, like they had like a whole scene, I think it was like episode 3 of Arondir basically like hugging a tree because they were making him cut it down, and then when he and Bronwyn finally kiss, it's because they're like holding hands on a tree trunk,
Yep. Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, the lot of tree stuff and a lot with Linden too.
The funnier one that people are saying was in like the first half of the season, people are saying, "Oh my God, it's so slow. It's moving so slowly." Blah, and everyone was saying, "Well, Tolkien famously did not write fast-paced books.
Right.
It takes them 100 plus pages to leave the Shire. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
That's a very Tolkien theme, moving slowly.
Right. Yeah, taking your time. I mean, that's the other thing is I'm sort of like, there's so much story. I don't know. You had people saying it was too slow. Some people saying it was too fast. I mean, like certain parts, and you're just like, you cannot please everybody. They have like this impossible task of trying to, reach out to all different groups and factions inside the fandom. And I think I'm actually really happy that they just sort of stuck to their guns and just decided on a story, and they're just boldly going forward with like their 5. I think it's still 5 seasons, right? I think. So yeah, that's what we've heard, anyways. So I'm excited. I'm excited that they have a plan, and because they even said when the pandemic hit and stuff that they sat down and started writing into season 2, because I remember the articles that were out where they talked about, now they can still change a lot of that stuff or whatever, but they had a chance to kind of go back and look at stuff. J.A. Bayona, they wanted to keep him on, and they felt like they wanted to do this more in arcs, and they had time to think about it. And I know it did affect the production a little bit, the pandemic for sure, but I'm excited to see what they're going to do moving forward. But anyway, I'll mention another kind of weak point, if that's okay. The mithril, the story was super cool. I mean, the Balrog there fighting that, like when they tell the story and the fight goes down, I'm cool with all of that. And I'm sort of like, wow, that's like some legend, they're telling us something that's really awesome. I'm imagining maybe that elf that was there was like Glorfindel. Maybe it was Celeborn. Who knows who this mighty elven warrior was that was fighting. And is it just a story, whatnot? But then when it goes to the point of like, without it, we're done.
Yeah.
I was like, are we that? I don't know. Are we that weak? I don't know. Like, that's
also kind of related to one of my other weak points, which was the elves.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't think they meant to do this, but the elves were coming off as kind of like, I mean, not villains, but some of the things that the elves were doing, I was like, I don't, and for me, the mithril thing, I'm like, so you guys are taking this ore from the dwarves that the dwarves discovered themselves.
Right.
And you are using it for your own purposes.
Yeah.
When you originally asked for their help and they said no.
Right.
We're not going to help you, but you kind of like went behind their back and did this thing anyway.
Right.
And I'm also I'm so confused about like, why are their lives tied to this tree?
Yeah.
Why is this tree gonna be saved by mithril? Yeah, it was all a little bit convoluted, and I had no clue how it was all working together.
Yeah, the mechanics of it. I mean, it's sort of, we're supposed to like, I don't know what we're supposed to do. How are we supposed to make the connections? Because for me, it's just like how to. I don't know, like that their power is, like you said, tied to that tree, and that tree was a manifestation of the power, something that's leaving them. That has to do with like Valinor, and I don't know. That part kind of threw me, and they might need to they wanted to tell a really cool story and have that cool moment with the mithril and tell, some, because that's not anything that's mentioned anywhere, right? That's totally show made up, right? This idea of where a mithril, or is it? suggested somewhere.
I have no idea.
I don't either.
The only thing that I take it back. There's a lot of things I'm confused about with this, but when Elrond is telling this story, he says it's apocryphal. It's, it's like a legend. It's not really based on any fact, but then it's kind of proven to be true.
Right.
So
Good point. I forgot.
Not sure.
I forgot
Not
he said
sure.
That. Yeah. So that was one that was sort of like it starts off really cool, and it's a great scene. What I didn't like, and I'll say this too, just as a quick mention for my buddy Lane. He really likes, I think, the characters that because you asked at the start of the show what you bring into this, like where you come from. And for me, like, I love wizards, I love Gandalf, love Radagast, all the wizards. I'm a big fan. So that's why the Stranger for me was so cool. I can just blindly say I don't care if it doesn't connect. I don't care, whatever. I love it. He is a big fan of like the Númenóreans and Gil-galad and Elendil and Isildur, and was like so hyped for their arc, and especially Gil-galad. And it feels like Gil-galad's kind of he's a
jerk. Yeah.
I'm glad you said it, because it's like he doesn't seem like a nice guy, and I'm just sort of out. Like, you're lying, you're using Elrond, but then
it feels there's a lot of like manipulation going on.
Yeah.
That I'm like, aren't you guys supposed to be the quote unquote good guys? And that's just what I think is really interesting, is that I don't think that's the story that they are trying to tell. I don't think that they're like, I really enjoy when we get to see those gray areas of, groups of people or characters or whatever, that we're like, not everyone is all good and not everyone is all bad. And we see those areas, but I don't think they were intending, I don't think that's what they set out to do.
Right. That did feel like, because every time like Gil-galad was talking, I'm just like, I don't trust you, man.
Yeah.
Like,
I didn't trust. There was one episode where I was like, I don't trust anything anyone is saying right now.
Yeah. He was staring. There's a couple shots of Gil-galad behind like Elrond and Durin as they're walking out, and he's sort of doing this, like looking at them as they leave, and I'm like, with his arms crossed, and I'm like, what are you about, man? Like, it just was really weird. So anyway, because my dad really likes the elves, and I feel like he hasn't seen this yet, and he's just a huge fan of their being super disciplined, and they're good, they fight for the light, the whole 9 yards, and they just seem a little shifty.
I used to really like, I was thinking back on my opinions of the elves when I was reading the books, and I was like, these are the coolest guys. They're and also like their portrayal in the books is also, they're kind of more like almost hippy dippy in the books, where they're like, yeah, we're just free, especially the ones that Frodo and Sam first meet, right when they're leaving. Yeah. And like, they're just really funny, where it's like, never ask an elf a question because you'll get 1,000 poetic answers that don't actually answer your question. And like, they just seemed really cool. And I was like, I want to meet them. And I have like slowly been changing, my opinion of the elves with like each additional adaptation, where I'm like, oh, y'all are not cool and free going.
Yeah, which sucks. I mean, I feel like they like Durin and Diza kind of stole the show. Like, they were so spectacular, and I think people just really gravitated towards their story. And it's almost like it's just the opposite of what we had. I mean, Gimli was still awesome, and the dwarves were in the Hobbit and everything, but it just, I don't know. They are not in a appealing group of characters, or just, I don't. Besides Elrond, I love Elrond, and Galadriel was even. How did you feel about Galadriel? And just her character.
Yeah, so I really loved Galadriel. It's really hard because also I think Morfydd Clark nailed this role, and I think she was just such a great actress, and so it's hard for me to be like critical of Galadriel, but I really enjoyed Galadriel. I love seeing so many she had so many more dimensions than just, I'm Cate Blanchett and I'm I'm gliding out into this forest. And so it's really great to get to see these different sides of her. But I think that is something that suffered with this time compression. Right. But it's still confusing because she's doing things and she's acting in a way that I'm like, she shouldn't be, like, she's ages old. She is thousands of years old, and she should know how to be more diplomatic in Numenor than this. And she should, know better, and she should be acting in a certain way by now.
That's a good point. Yeah, because she feels a lot younger than...
Yeah, they made her out to be this really young, naive person, but she is older than the majority of the characters in the show.
Wow, good point. Yeah.
So on that hand, it's disappointing, but I understand you also have to have those flaws in order to have a TV show, in order to have an interesting character to watch. You have to have those
someone
flaws.
Who's dynamic and is going to grow and learn something and whatnot. Because there were moments, there were glimpses where you're like, "Ooh, wow, she's really locked in and wise and knows where it was self-reflective and stuff as well," which was really cool towards the end. And then just on the lookout this whole time and lets her guard. She's super on the warpath for Sauron, seeing Sauron everywhere, and then doesn't see him when he's right in front of her, lets her guard down. And then at the end, he's right there in their midst. I mean, that at least they pulled off pretty well, but they had to kind of sacrifice some of her, I don't know, I don't know, I want to say wisdom, but just
some of her intelligence almost. Yeah,
something. Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Morphin Clark kills it though. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely kills it. I won't go too much into this because I already did a full rant on it in the previous episode. But part of the reason why the finale was so disappointing for me is that I was convinced that Halbrand was not Sauron because I thought that was the most obvious and basic choice.
Right.
And I thought that they were going to do something a lot more interesting and compelling than that. And that did not happen.
Right.
So I was I was doing a live stream reaction watch through.
Yeah.
And I just kept saying, I'm so mad. I'm so mad.
Oh, wow.
That being said, though, the scene where, he's been revealed and Galadriel knows it's him, and he's in her mind, those sequences were fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you. They were stunning. It was really, really cool to kind of see that finally we got some power in I don't know, we got to see them. Yeah, he's in her mind and doing something. And because I was when are we going to see actual people use power and magic and stuff or whatever? But yeah, so that was neat. I am with you though. I thought the whole time from the get-go, I was that's him. That's Sauron. There's just I felt that's what they were going to do. You know what I mean? Or there was too many clues or there's whatever. It just looks like it's too obvious. You know what I mean? It's very obvious that is who they're setting up. So midway through the season, I was sort of okay, it is like you said, it's too obvious. They can't do that. So who else could it be? Is he even in it? We're not even going to see him. This is going to be...
Yeah, that's the other thing. I was just we might get a little Sauron teaser at the very end of the finale, but I was he's just going to come in and be his own character. I was I don't think they're going to hide him. Yeah. And that's exactly what they did.
We had someone Lane was so I mean, so many things are going on. The ride was a roller coaster, but someone came in and they said that they thought Gil-galad was going to be Sauron. That he had shifted into his form, and they were going super crazy with it. And actually, Lane was that'd probably be the most interesting thing that they could do now.
Yeah, and I think that would explain a lot of the things that he was
Yeah, why is a jerk?
The way he was acting, the things he was saying to Elrond,
right?
The actions he's trying to take.
Yeah, he wants that mithril really cool. and everything. I was dang, that actually would be kind of cool. And then the most, again, the thing that they're setting up from the get-go, I actually thought I teach high school, and a lot of my students, they were watching the show, popping by, just, saying that they loved it and talking about it. And the more I listened to them, I was this show does seem like it is directed at an audience that's a little bit younger than myself. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
Because they were super caught up in the who is Sauron thing, super caught up in it. And I felt well, wait a second. Now, me sitting here, knowing what I know and knowing about the interest in the Forge and all the things that he says, pulled this up a dead man, just different things. And they just were caught up in it could be this person. Is it the stranger or is it Halbrand? And I was it's not the stranger. So it would only be Halbrand, or it's something completely different, something crazy. But I was thinking about it too, I don't know, on a different level, I guess, or I had a lot of lore and other context coming into it, and they weren't really aiming for me. You know what I mean? Like I feel like they were aiming to kind of get that younger generation, or someone like even my wife, who's a newbie and just has no clue whatsoever, who was sort of like, I mean, I got to the point where I couldn't say anything because she was like, I don't want to hear any lore, nothing, right? She just wanted to like consume this because she was on that ride that they wanted to take her on. And I feel like people like you and I, or other people who have been in the fandom a little bit longer and have read the material, kind of saw what they were setting up and thought,
yeah, it's hard to just like turn that part of your brain off.
Yeah, for sure. So that kind of almost spoiled it, but then it made you like double take and think about it more than maybe we should have. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah. But.
Well, to maybe close us out, what are our predictions now for season 2? Because I honestly have no idea, because the season ended in such a way that I did not think it was going to end. So I'm like, I don't know what threads we're going to pick up, because it feels like I think I'll still say this. I was in, episode 7, which is after the Mount Doom explosion. Mm-hmm. They release Isildur's horse into the wild, right? And I'm like, okay, we're going to have a moment. The horse is going to find Isildur and save him. Great. That didn't happen in the finale. So that's like the only prediction I have at this point, is that we're going to see the horse save Isildur in season 2.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but I think for 2 years that horse is going to be walking around
running around.
Oh, it's such a long time. Bless him. So predictions for me, like this is I love to go kind of crazy and just wild. And so what I had recently started thinking about was like, what other characters, like big names, might they drop in this or whatever? So they didn't mention that was Gandalf, right? They didn't say that the stranger was Gandalf. They
didn't explicitly state this is Gandalf, but I think they are very much heavily implying it because of that line about following your nose.
Right. And I was cool with that, because it's so weird that when you see Mordor created, they just pan up and it just says, Mordor, and it tells you, like, they directly tell you, like, this is Mordor.
I have to say, that's, I think, the lowest point of the season was when they scratch out the Southlands and write Mordor. That felt... because it was like, I could have told you it was Mordor the moment the volcano exploded. I didn't need this.
I mean, it makes me wonder if somewhere like back behind the scenes, they see the reaction to it and they say, okay, in that last episode where we just have him say, I'm Gandalf, or they write Gandalf on the screen, they said, let's not do that. Let's go with a Gandalf quote instead. I'm just kidding. But so I would love to see more of him. And I definitely want to know what's happening in Rune. And it would be cool if there were even other wizards were already there, perhaps, or maybe is he the wizard that's sent, because the mystics.
I think it could be cool if this is. I didn't want this one to be Gandalf, because we know so much. I mean, Gandalf is great, obviously.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to spend some time with a different character, even especially a blue wizard, because we don't know anything about them.
I know.
So it could be that this is not Gandalf, and the phrase about follow your nose is something that, like, let's say this is Saruman. That's something that he passed on to Gandalf.
Yeah.
The thing about follow your nose. So.
Right. Yeah, because we were before the whole thing started, once we saw some trailers and stuff, I thought, well, the first wizard maybe that might show up. I think the blues technically, I could be wrong, I think they technically come earlier. I don't even know. But anyways, Saruman, he has some beef with the hobbits at some point. So maybe he does get in here with the Harfoots and it gets a little crazier, things go wrong, or who knows. I don't know. But I just want to see more of the wizards for sure. And I thought about big names. So we know that by the time we get to The Hobbit, we know that there are dragons. There are still dragons around during this time, and that there are, like, Smaug is there, right? And so I was thinking, like, if they really wanted to shock people in season 2 or 3 or something, and just, I don't know, bring another dragon into the mix,
have
that
a
we
dragon in,
didn't know about or something. Like, if you're gonna go and just make up characters, which is fine, I'm all for it, and make up these different things, like, tell that story, like, give us a dragon, or maybe, Smaug's daddy or something. I don't know, like, just go for it. Another one that I like in the trilogy, so Glorfindel. When Glorfindel shows up, and I love that they in the movies that they have Arwen, and this is where I think you can do, like, the way that they did Arwen rescuing Frodo in the movies is awesome, and I absolutely love it. It's what we fell in love with those movies years ago. But then when you read it and it's Glorfindel or whatever, that's also super cool. So I feel like you can have two sort of ideas in your mind. It doesn't really, they're both just awesome. characters. But I love Glorfindel and the idea that he's sent back and he's sent to help aid them in this fight against Sauron. So if Gil-galad and these guys know now, if they inform people and they realize, okay, yeah, he is that Sauron is back and truly there, because this whole quest has been like Galadriel trying to get them to realize that he's still out there or whatever. Why would they send the meteor? Why would they send a wizard in if they didn't know Sauron was there? So that's a little confusing. But then if they do now for sure know, then they might be sending someone like Glorfindel back in to kind of help out. And I think that in the lore, that's what he was sent in there for. The other big one, like Celeborn, who is not Celadad, right? So like he's got to show up like somewhere. I feel like
we're obviously when that happened in that episode, I saw a lot of people like raging about like, oh my God, they killed Celeborn. Right. And I'm like, no, it's pretty obvious by the way that she talks about it that he is going to come back, and and she's going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe that you've been alive all this time, you know? Right,
exactly. And people felt a little, I mean, it's her brother who has sort of sent her. I mean, I think that's the first confirmed death that she experiences. And people were kind of wondering, why isn't she more upset about, Celeborn being like not coming back or being dead or whatever? It's like she's still probably secretly holding out some hope, right? Or who it's not confirmed. She just never saw him again. She doesn't know anything, but she did see her brother and she did see Sauron's mark. And so that's what kind of set her on this whole thing, because people were kind of griping about that a little bit, but I'm like, it just is not, it's almost like something. So it's your, like, it's your husband, it's your soulmate or whatever. It's her person. And so she doesn't want to, that's maybe even more of an issue or something for her to kind of carry. So we don't know. So I feel like that would be kind of cool to see, because I've always wanted more of his character, and it would just be cool to see how he supports her.
I've read things or I've heard things that an actor for Celeborn has been cast, or that we are confirmed that we're gonna see Celeborn in season 2, but also this is all just hearsay. These are all things that someone who heard it somewhere else, who read it somewhere else, told me. So
that's awesome.
I don't know where that information is coming from, but I think that would be great. In season 2. I think we're going to see, I mean, it's like, okay, this isn't much of a prediction when, there's only 3 options left, but I think the next season is going to be about but I think we're going to see the creation of the dwarven rings in the next season, because we're having all of these interesting power dynamics with the prince and the king, and between the dwarves and the elves. I think like King Durin is going to be pissed if or when he finds out that they used mithril to create the elven rings. So true. I think we're going to see some of that. I hope we're going to see some more of these like political interactions and implications in Numenor. Now that I think that's something that we didn't even talk about in the finale episode, which is that the king died. So, and of course, Numenor is going to be destroyed. It's still going to happen. So, when is that going to happen? I don't think that'll happen until, season 3 or 4. I don't think that would be next season. But, and then I think, I was saying that I think we're done seeing the Harfoots like as a tribe, just because it felt like we said goodbye to them in the finale, which was very sad for me, because I love Poppy and I'm very upset that she did not go with Nori and the stranger. But I don't think we're going to see more of the Harfoots in the next season, so I think that will make room for us to see more of Numenor, more of the elves, and for them to go into those details. I like that. I think it would be cool to because it is a lot, and I mean, you do have to kind of follow Nori and the stranger, and maybe when we come back to them, they'll be settled down somewhere. Maybe they'll settle down in a nice spot that looks really really nice, and who knows. One last final thing, we had a conversation on our podcast about the idea that, does Elendil seem like he is into Muriel? People were kind of picking up on these vibes that those two might kind of like each other. Did you think that at all? Like, no, I kind of got that as like
friendship, and
and especially with her going blind by the end of the season, she's really having to place her trust in him. And he's also, I think it's just that they're both in very vulnerable positions because he thinks that Isildur is dead.
Yeah.
She's just gone blind. She's returning home, finding her father
right.
dead.
Yeah.
So I think they're both just in very vulnerable positions.
See,
right now.
Mary Clay, I love this. This is why. So we call the Unexpected podcast Unexpected because unexpected conversations like that come up and they have no basis really. They just they pop up and you're sort of like, wait, what? How? Nah, that doesn't make sense. But it was interesting to talk about for a second. So it's always kind of funny because they're interesting characters though, and I am interested to see what happens to Muriel because of the whole thing with her father. Like that's going to be wild to see next season.
Yeah. My final thing that isn't necessarily a prediction, more just a hope. We better see Tom Bombadil at some point in this series.
Oh my, that was okay. No, before I was typing down my list of big names that I was gonna drop, that's the one I forgot. Holy smokes, I'm glad you mentioned that.
It would just be fascinating.
Yeah.
To see Tom Bombadil finally adapted on the screen, unless you count the Soviet adaptation from the 1990s. I think that's the only film adaptation that Tom Bombadil appears in. Anyway, when the first, articles and pictures and stuff were coming out and people were talking about, Meteor Man and stuff, I was like, that it's gotta be Tom Bombadil, right? Because the original Vanity Fair article, I think said something about and two Harfoots discover a mysterious enigma in the wilderness. Right. And I'm like, an enigma?
Exactly.
That's the only word I have used to describe Tom Bombadil. Right. That's gotta be him, right?
Oh, God.
So I was still even holding out a little bit of tiny hope that maybe the stranger was Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
So I would really love for them to put Tom Bombadil in this series at some point.
You just made my night. I'm so glad you said that because I hope so too.
Do you have any is there a one last favorite moment, a favorite character, something that sticks out from this season that you're just like, man, I really loved that?
Yeah, because we've mentioned all these other characters, and so I've talked about the stranger and Elrond, all these different things, but Sadek, who was he's gone, right? I mean,
I've really enjoyed him.
From the get-go, he pops out clear and clear, right? He's looking around, doing his whole thing and leading the chants, and he's got the big book there, and you almost start to kind of take him for granted a little bit, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is just the guy, he's the leader, and then it's time for him to step up. And the younger generation needs him, and he goes out and he passes on his wisdom, uses his trail finding abilities and gets out there. You think he's a goner, and then boom, he helps save the day. I just thought that was a kind of a surprise for me that he was going, and then he goes, and it's just this awesome arc. I just didn't think it was going to be. I didn't think we were going to lose any of the Harfoots, and so that one just hit me.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was like, aside from I don't know, some miscellaneous, some soldiers or some side characters, the only major character we saw this season that died was Sadek. Yeah. And I'm like, seriously, you guys chose a Harfoot? That's mean.
It was a stab to the heart. I mean, I was like, oh my God, because I was hoping he'd be he does such a great job. He was so good, just the accent, everything.
And
delivery.
This was that actor. I believe he is a Sir. I think it's Sir Lenny Henry.
Wow.
He was one of the ones that when they were announcing the cast, he had he's still alive. Yeah. He has a very distinguished theater history behind him. So he was one of the ones coming in where it's he has a very established history of very distinguished acting. So I think he did really, even though it was a very small role comparatively, I think he did a really great job.
Well, because I've always gravitated towards the guide by the side, and I like the person who's guiding other characters and stuff, and it's sort of the village wisdom or whoever that might be, the council of Elrond, that whole those people, and so he fit in that category, but was also a Harfoot, and I was just like, this is awesome. And then he had the other, I forget who was the one, what was her name? She was, oh my gosh, she was always nagging him about something. At the end, Malva, yes. Oh my gosh, she was. They were great. They had such a good dynamic.
Yeah, they had really good dynamics. Yeah. All of the Harfoots, it was giving me a lot of like very similar and reminiscent of like Lobelia Saxville Baggins and some of that like kind of like hobbity gossipy things, and like they're very like the town busybody. And so like some of the in the early episodes, the way that some of the like Harfoot elders were playing off of each other was really great.
Right. Yeah. So that for me is just a big final, kind of takeaway. I see he's gone, and I will wait for him, So
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you on the internet?
So my buddy Lane and I run an unexpected podcast. I said at the top of the show, we'll be diving into the Silmarillion. So you can find us at Up Talkin' Tolkien on Instagram, where we post most of our stuff. And then again, the podcast is just an unexpected podcast. You can search it on any of your podcast players.
That's What I'm Talking About is a proud member of WBNE. If you want to learn more about the network, you can go to WBNE.org. The cover art is by Vaishon Brandon. You can support him on Instagram at Vaishon Designs. You can get merch for That's What I'm Talking About by going to tpublic.com/user/talkingaboutpod. You can follow the podcast on social media at TolkienAboutPod. And you can follow me on Twitter and TikTok at MCWattsUp and on Instagram at MCTurndownForWhat. If you want to support the podcast, you can become a patron and go to patreon.com/TolkienAboutPod. You can become a sponsor of the podcast like the wonderful, amazing, magnificent, beautiful unicorn Taylor. Taylor, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you. I appreciate your support. And you are a wonderful part of our community. Thank you so much. If you like what you're listening to, please make sure to rate and review. You can rate on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I don't know about any other major podcasting platforms out there, but I don't know. Take a look. Look down at your phone, whatever platform you're listening on, see if there's a way to rate and review. And if there is, please do so. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
I would say just hang in there and give season 2 a ride. It's going to be a couple years. And just hang in there. Because go back. I would say this. If you get a chance, I started my rewatch and I'm enjoying it. I would tell folks, go back and rewatch this if you can and try to find some positive takeaways from it, because there's a lot of good in this. I think a rewatch is going to be very enjoyable, because I think there's going to be a lot of Easter eggs and, threads to pick up on. It's always really interesting to rewatch or reread things and be able to find those things that you didn't, it's like, watching it with a whole new viewpoint. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, and thank you so much. This is so much fun. And by the way, since we're doing the Silmarillion, to put you on the spot, if ever you get some free time, you want to pop over and kind of help us struggle through that Silmarillion. I'm happy to join y'all. I make no promises on helping you understand it or comprehend it. All right. Well, that's fine. You can just help us muddle through. I don't know. Be the blind leading the blind, maybe. I don't know. And that's what I'm talking about.